Hello, folks. Welcome to episode 8 of season 2 of the GOAT series, folks. I'm your host, Jeremy Hadler, and today we're going to talk about the greatest Cowboys player in franchise history, folks, with special guest Craig, who is our diehard Cowboys fan. And before we hand over the mic to Craig, I got to mention about the quick rules here that I always do in the GOAT series that I've done from season 1 to season 2, where we choose 5 candidates who we think is the greatest Cowboys player of all time in franchise history up to this point. The criteria we always look for in these candidates is the accomplishments, tenure with the team, how they played, the stats for the franchise, on and off the field. We also do an honorable mention, especially when we have guests on. They can have their own honorable mention if they choose to, and we do so. Craig has one. And at the end of the video, we choose our ultimate Cowboys GOAT. And before I hand over to Craig, I got to say one thing is, how about them Cowboys?
How about them Cowboys? How about them Cowboys? America's team. What else can you say? The big D.
Craig, we'll start with you. Since America's team is here, who is your honorable mention?
Well, and this may seem a little bit strange and it's a little off balance. For those people who know me, it fits right in. So I'm going to throw out Herschel Walker. And people will say, Herschel Walker, did he really play with the Cowboys? And I say, yes, he did play with the Cowboys. You talk about the whole Herschel Walker, what a great running back at Georgia, jumped into the USFL and sort of made it legitimate right off the bat. But the Cowboys, in their infinite wisdom, drafted them in the 5th round in 1985. What a steal for arguably, one of the best, running backs at the time. That's not what makes him my most valuable Cowboy. For those Cowboys fans that remember the infamous Herschel Walker trade with the Minnesota Vikings that enabled, and what shall I say, the Cowboys to create a dynasty of the 1990s, Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Irving, and the great defense that they had, the number of players, the depth and the quality of players that they, and as Jimmy Johnson said, stole from the Minnesota Vikings in what was the second great train robbery. Like I said, you can argue whether, he was that or this was that, but his greatness made that trade and created 3 Super Bowl championships in 4 years and a dominant team for, like I said, most of the 90s. So like I said, for me, that was an interesting change. And like I said, I don't know that you can, say it was Herschel Walker. He was the value in that trade, but there were some smart folks that made some wheeling and dealing that made America's team that much better for about 10 years.
Definitely. I like that pick a lot with Herschel Walker. Definitely understand with that value too. That definitely plays a factor of making that being a part of that Cowboys dynasty. Also like them hitting on the picks, but definitely as you mentioned about the value of how he set it up a bit and got to get value out of him, even though it was probably one of the worst trades in NFL history. But great for the Cowboys, so just help you out.
I tell everybody, I grew up a Minnesota Viking fan. My father went to college with the great Bud Grant. I jumped Allegiant many, many years ago, and this is part of the reason why I'm no longer a Vikings fan. And the Cowboys made that happen.
For my honorable mention, this guy, I'm going to go a bit old school here. This guy played 14 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. That is Randy White. Played defensive tackle. The Manster is his nickname, folks. The Manster. 1-time Super Bowl champion. 1-time Super Bowl co-MVP. 7 first-team All-Pro. 1 second-team All-Pro. 9-time Pro Bowler. Cowboys Ring of Honor. The Hall of Fame he made. Stats, folks. Given the stat timeline, which the stats didn't really come out till the late 80s and during his playing time, he had 111 sacks, 10 fumble recoveries. Known for his strength, his work ethic, his ferocious play, and his agility. Craig, what do you think about Randy White?
He is the epitome of what a defensive end looked like. Like you said, the Manster. It's incredible that he played that long and that hard in a position, especially when you look at the time frame he was there. He missed some of the earlier Cowboys dynasty, and he played through what was arguably, other than maybe right now, some of the longest years of the Cowboy dynasty. The co-defensive MVP with Harvey Martin still stands out pretty much in Super Bowl history as, one of those great achievements. And his stats, stand up for all by themselves. There is no question that defense was unto their own in Cowboys lore. And he is a true example of time frame of what it looked like, even when, like I said, the Cowboys weren't necessarily on that big, long winning streak and setting the world on fire. Like I said, the 80s were and I'll use the word tumultuous time for the Cowboys, with a lot of change going on and lots of adjustments. And it was a hard time playing there, and he really stood out.
Again, I feel for him, he absolutely has to be like not on the list of candidate wise, but I feel like he definitely has to get recognition. Honestly, he didn't be a part of, like, as you mentioned about the dynasty, but what he did without like all those great players, like, set himself apart and helped lead the franchise to become greater, and ultimately, like, in the future, Cowboys became so much greater. But Randy White was a big part of that defense and really helped that Cowboys out.
Look at the Cowboys, and they've had star big name quarterbacks: Dandy Don Meredith, Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman. You go down the line, the name recognition with the quarterbacks at the Cowboys, and they were always sort of the face of the Cowboys. There was a time frame in there when he was really the face.
We get to our first candidate off the board here, folks. This player played 12 seasons with the Cowboys. That is Larry Allen. Rest in peace. He passed away not that long ago. He's a Hall of Famer, one-time Super Bowl champion, 7 first-team All-Pro, 11-time Pro Bowler, made the Cowboys Ring of Honor. Things that really stick out to me about Larry Allen is his strength, because that man could literally lift it up. Biggest guy, workload I've ever seen, especially watch his combine. It's ridiculous. The power and speed what this guy could do, unbelievable. Craig, what do you think about him?
Larry Allen, obviously offensive linemen just don't get the recognition and sometimes the accolades that they deserve. Larry Allen, here's where you look at it. Emmitt Smith's rushing records maybe aren't totally put all in, well, it was all Larry Allen, but he was a big part of Mr. Smith's rushing records and his ability to achieve all those records. He accounted for the fewest sacks in the NFL, covered 4 fumbles, an offensive lineman recovering 4 fumbles. There is, without question, his ability to protect the quarterback and to manhandle the defensive lineman, who, when you look at the time frame he played on, there was a huge evolution going on in the defensive line, and they were getting not only bigger, but so much faster and stronger. You look at the Reggie Whites and you look at the Lawrence Taylors and that group, that dynamics was changing on what a defenses looked like. He really changed that. He was part, again, of that 90s dynasty. He caught the tail end, the fabulous 3 on there, but his strength, his agility, and his leadership on that offensive line gave the Cowboys the ability to be successful. And really, like I said, Emmitt Smith and what he accomplished in what shall I say, the later years, his rushing career really can be attributed to his leadership on that offensive line.
Larry Allen definitely played a huge part in that line to help Emmitt Smith out. The only thing that I'll a little critique Larry Allen, which is unfortunate for him, was he never got as many Super Bowl rings as like the other guys did. He only had 1 Super Bowl ring. I feel like if he would have definitely like been a part of like that dynasty, he would definitely have more. And he probably could have had more if the guys like stayed longer and they were still up to their potential a bit more, of like not declining a bit. I definitely think Larry Allen would have definitely won another Super Bowl or 2.
I agree with that. The Cowboys had a team of destiny, so to speak, in the early 90s. I don't want to belabor the Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson feud. And ultimately, he is an example of a player who didn't get some of the accolades and didn't get to as many Super Bowls because they couldn't agree on who was really in charge and what they wanted to do in Cowboy Land. After such a great start, it's sort of a shame that they couldn't keep that together. No matter what you like or dislike about them, got to be a look back for the Cowboys organization and say, we probably missed the mark when we couldn't mend that feud with Jimmy Johnson and keep him around. It wouldn't have been a 20-year career with him, probably. That was inevitable. But if you could have gotten 4 or 5 more years out of that, you might have gotten a couple more Super Bowls for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, Larry Allen you never see like this amount of talent come out, like especially power and speed, and just literally destroy defensive players, especially like the guys that we mentioned of Reggie White, even though Reggie White had his time too against Larry Allen. Bruce Smith. There's so many guys, and that era was really known for the pass rushing, had some of the best of all time. And Larry Allen had to go against the best, and Larry Allen did a pretty good job of containing that guy and limiting what they could do against the quarterback.
Absolutely.
Now we get to our next player here. This player, nicknamed Mr. Cowboy, which there's a lot of people you could probably say are Mr. Cowboy, but this one is definitely a Mr. Cowboy. Played 14 seasons with the Cowboys. That is Bob Lilly, Mr. Defensive Tackle. As you mentioned already about Randy White, in the Hall of Fame he is in. One-time Super Bowl champion, 7 first-team All-Pros, 2-time second Pro Bowler, 11 Pro Bowls, made the Cowboys Ring of Honor. Again, same with the stats as I mentioned before. He had 95.5 sacks, 18 fumble recoveries. Again, known for his strength, quickness, and his intelligence. Craig, what did you think about Bob Lilly?
Bob Lilly helped set up the Cowboys became contenders because of Bob Lilly. He talked about the great defensive players of the 90s. When you go back to the 60s, those guys, nobody considered a defensive player great back then, I don't think. You look back in time and wonder, nobody talked much about defensive players and what they were doing out there. That was hard-nosed football. They had one face guard and they were punching each other in the face and poking each other in the eye, and and it was every man for himself. Again, you go 14 years during, and I'll say those conditions. That was a tough game back then. He was a tough individual. That doomsday defense back then, they were an amazing group of individuals. But here's a stat that I really think sets him apart. He was named to the top 100 team players in the NFL over time. He was number 10. He wasn't just in the top 100. He was number 10, and he was the third defensive player on that list. So when you look at that quality and where they, over the course of time, what he did and how he provided a stable environment for all those years during the Cowboys' climb, sort of from obscurity, really. His contribution is really measurable, setting the Cowboys up for, hey, this is where the Cowboys are. You've got a player that is so high quality. I'm not even sure they knew how good of a player he was during his playing days, because he was that much farther ahead of most of the rest of the defensive players out there.
Definitely. I think the big one that I always remember Bob Lilly is between our teams, Craig, of the Ice Bowl is what I really know him for, especially with Bart Starr again, the game-winning touch on that QB sneak. But Bob Lilly was really a big game changer in that game. Remember, he was putting blocking, stuffing us on the run game, not letting us get away. And Bart Starr barely got in because Bob Lilly was right there just to get it on him.
You see, growing up in Minnesota, that was really not the Ice Bowl. That was a walk in the park on a Sunday afternoon. The Vikings played outside just like Green Bay for a long time. Again, they gave up what I say was literally the one of the best home field advantages. Come on, come play the Vikings in December outside. The Green Bay Packers have taken advantage of that for a long time, and that's a great tribute to your team, the Packers, that they've kept that history and that advantage. But you're right, he manhandled people for a very long time. And the defensive linemen at that time, they were known. Obviously, people knew this and that, but they weren't the stars that, like you said, in the 90s that we talked about, that really dominated and people used them as they were setting the course of the game. Don't think we appreciated what kind of a player he was.
I definitely agree. He was ahead of before anyone's time, really, of what we really know, as you mentioned before, what great defensive players we're going to see out there. And he was just the guy, like I mentioned with the other guys too so far. They set the tone. And he's I would call him the Neanderthal, the caveman that started the bottom. And They've carried the torch since, but he started pretty good, starting good, high quality for the Cowboys. Next player on our list, which this person I think everyone knows if you watch football. If you watch Fox America back in the day of Game of the Week of America, now he's on with Joe Buck on Monday Night Football. That is Troy Aikman. Played 12 seasons with the Cowboys, 3-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 1-time NFL Man of the Year, 6-time Pro Bowler, 1-time completions percentage leader, all rookie team, Cowboys Ring of Honor, made the Hall of Fame, and his stats, folks, 61.5 completion percentage, 32,942 passing yards, 165 passing TDs, 141 interceptions, 81.6 pass rating, 15 comebacks, 20 game-winning drives. The thing that really sticks out to me before I hand it over to you, Craig, with Troy Aikman was his draft, and he was in the movie Jerry Maguire.
Show me the money.
Those are the two things that stick out to me about him. That draft that he was in, Hall of Famers you saw, then my team somehow messed up by taking the biggest offensive lineman, Tony Manerick, and he was the worst guy ever out there. So that always will stick out to me with Troy Aikman, and then him being Jerry Maguire, which was pretty cool to see him just be in the background and just talk.
Well, the only thing bad I can say about Troy Aikman is that he started his career in Oklahoma, and I'm a Longhorn, so quite honestly, there's no positive about that. However, I will say he was wise enough to move on and go back when moving from college to college was not an easy task and end up at UCLA. I have to give the credit where credit is due. He learned his lesson, moved on, and what a career. Jeremy, I don't even know where to start, but I'll go with this. So part of my real love for the Cowboys is I lived in Austin, Texas for a number of years. And during the transition from Tom Landry to Jimmy Johnson, they also changed where their training camp was. They used to train out in California, and I want to say Thousand Oaks or something in California. Well, Jimmy Johnson thought it might be nice to do something different. So they started doing their training camp in a small college in Austin, Texas. And Jimmy was there, and Troy Aikman and Michael Irvin and Emmitt Smith and all those guys from the great team, they were great young men, and they hung around Austin. And that scene in Jerry Maguire is who Troy Aikman was back then. He would wander around, for those of you who know Austin and 6th Street, he would show up in a bar here or there, and they really solidified. Why? Why do people call them America's team? Because they were America's team back then. They were good guys. Like I said, the offense, there's not really too much of a knock on where you want to go with what Troy Aikman accomplished and what the Cowboys did. The 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, that's an incredible run. Obviously, we'll continue to talk about those other team members. There are some great players surrounding him. Arguably, maybe one of the best teams of all time. We're talking about the Cowboys over the course of 40 years, 50 years. But, that about 8-10 year spread, they were as good as it was. Again, we sometimes fail to appreciate what we see when we're seeing it, and we get used to just that quality that's going on. And we don't always have that continuously. He had a strong arm. He read defenses really well. Mobility was not necessarily his strong point. But then, you go back to the Larry Allen and the offensive line that they built. Goodness, with Emmitt running out of the backfield and Michael out on there, pass rushing was difficult because they were trying to defend everybody and stop the rest of the offense. He really thrived in the offensive scheme with Jimmy Johnson, and that's where I think the other part of his success goes. Jimmy Johnson has a great football mind, and he really took Troy's talents and abilities and maximized an offensive team around him to make the most of their talents, and they did. And you can't say much more. love watching him on Monday Night Now, and enjoy him as a commentator. Everybody's got their opinion of commentators, but he is a true class act, and he has shown that all the way through his career. I think he is a real attribute, and another one of those reasons why people look at this and sometimes say, why in the world are they America's team? They're not. Well, we've got some of those All-American boys that they're a credit.
Let's get to our next player here. This guy also part of America's team and another teammate of Troy Aikman. Played 13 seasons with the Cowboys. He has the most rushing TDs and rushing yards in NFL history. That is Emmitt Smith. Emmitt Smith, 3-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 1-time MVP, 1-time Offensive Rookie of the Year, 4 first-team All-Pro. He's the Hall of Famer, folks. 1-time second-team All-Pro, 8-time Pro Bowler, 4-time rushing yards leader, 3-time rushing TDs leader, 1-time NFL scoring leader, which is rare, folks. Made the Cowboys Ring of Honor, made the All-Rookie team. 11 straight seasons, he had at least 1,000 rushing yards. 11 seasons, folks. His stats: 17,162 rushing yards, 153 rushing TDs, 486 receptions, 3,012 receiving yards, 20,174 total scrimmage yards. He had the Dallas offensive lineman nicknamed Superman because he was unstoppable. He really was, of just breaking the tackles, and he just find ways to get around. Very physical guy. What do you think about him, Craig?
Wow. You could talk about Emmitt Smith forever, and his durability and his abilities and talent. We're not just talking about Emmitt Smith as, maybe the GOAT of the Cowboys. Is he, in that category of the greatest all time? When you talk about running backs, he's got to be in the top 3 out there. There's a lot of people, like I said, I know some folks in Chicago who might argue with who was the best. And you have a team in Detroit that wasn't very good, that had one really, really talented running back. And, you go back to the great Jim Brown and such. There's a lot of running backs you could get in there and talk about. But his durability over all those years with the Cowboys is a credit to where he's going. Then the one stat that is that he won a Super Bowl, was the MVP, won the rushing crown, and was a Super Bowl MVP all in 1 year. Never been done again. Obviously, running back. But when you look at that, that is a testament. Emmitt Smith, the talent he had, but to the team that, again, I think Jimmy Johnson built around them to take advantage of who he was, his talent, and their ability to make that team so great at that time. Most rushing yards. People talk about longevity and this and that. He didn't milk it out for, all those years. He was productive until the very end with the Cowboys. And that type of commitment and that type of talent, when you take the bruising, the 90s, the change to the defensive players, the size, the speed, the hits that they were taking back then, it had become a very different dynamic, how you had to survive, I think, as a running back in the NFL. His talent and his durability really sets him apart from most running backs that have ever played in the NFL. Just a real team leader, I think. He was the guy in the background who, if there was a problem, he was the guy looking after Aikman and make sure that they said, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this is why we're doing it. And off they went. They were very successful.
You had arguably one of the greatest running backs of all time. Just amazing how dominant he was. The big critique, and I gave him about this for when I was doing my greatest running back of all time, was he had that amazing offensive line. You can't be better than that, especially when you have Larry Allen and accolades of just all the great players surrounding him. But what sets him apart too is he was still dominant. Took it a step further and became one of the greatest and outperformed what you possibly could and just be more amazing than you would be a solid running back. Not only did he become the solid running back, he became one of the greatest running backs of all time.
I agree. There are the naysayers out there and say, Aikman and Smith and Irving and that, they were good simply because they had a great coach, they had great supporting players, they had all these answers. They were great players all the way around, and they were talented. Yes, the Cowboys of the 90s put the pieces together, and they fit. But the talent goes without saying because they performed at levels and did things that just didn't seem possible previously during that time frame. Great team, but as individuals, again, another really solid individual. I talk about their character. I talk about the team and positive impact that they had on the community, where they were at that time. Emmitt Smith was a huge part of that.
Definitely was, especially 11 straight seasons with at least 1,000 rushing yards. I don't know how you can do that, really. Like, especially in today's game, you don't see anyone ever have that of at least 1,000 rushing yards for 11 straight years. Running backs, they don't last long in the league, and that just shows you how durable and how he can stay very long of his longevity. That's just very amazing to me to see with Emmitt Smith. We get to our last player here, ladies and gentlemen, and then we get to our ultimate Cowboys GOAT, ladies and gentlemen. This guy, I think everyone knows who this is. Nicknamed Captain America, Captain Comeback, played 11 seasons for the Cowboys. The guy I would say was the America player for football before America's team for the Cowboys, and that is Roger Staubach. Two-time Super Bowl champion, one-time Super Bowl MVP, one-time NFL Man of the Year, one-time second-team All-Pro, six-time Pro Bowler, one-time passing TD leader, four-time passer rating leader, took them to 5 Super Bowls. 5 Super Bowls. He's in the Cowboys Ring of Honor. Hall of Famer. His stats, folks. 57% completion percentage. Not that great, but that's how it was back in the day. His touchdown and interception ratio, 153 to 109. Had 22,700 passing yards, 83.4 passer rating, 2,264 rushing yards, 20 rushing TDs. I think the big thing, and I'll hand it over to you, Craig, again, about his clutchness, was his leadership. He really performed well and was very poised under pressure.
I think Roger Staubach is why they're America's team. You start as a Heisman Trophy winner for the Naval Academy, serving in Vietnam. Most people probably don't know or recognize that he started as a rookie at 27 because of his military service. You look at the stats and what he achieved. Yeah, he played all those years when he started that much later. That potentially could have been a 15, 16, 17-year career. He took care of business. He did what he signed up for. And that's important. The leadership of that team and the person that he was for the Dallas Cowboys is I look at him, Captain Comeback, give me a break, Roger the Dodger, he has so many great experiences. And I'll tell you, he's what broke my heart in 1975, playing in Minnesota in a heavily favored Viking team. And Roger Staubach, what did he do? He invented the Hail Mary pass. To this day, Minnesota fans, those of us who are still alive, have never forgiven the Cowboys for that. And that helped me find my way to the Cowboys, and that they ended up beating a heavily favored Minnesota team in Minnesota in the winter. It is, again, a credit to his perseverance and dedication to the game and to the team. Passer ratings, 83, that's amazing. And he didn't always have great teams surrounding him, but he had great players around him, and they brought in good talent, and he made the best of everything they could. And the 5 Super Bowls, where do you go with that? Starting quarterback in 4 of them. Talk about, again, back at a time when longevity and those kind of streaks didn't really take place. It was a different football world back in the 60s and early 70s. And you didn't see some of the domination that we see today, or really over the last 20, 30 years, where you put together a great team and they put a run together, as we have seen Kansas City over the last several years. You didn't see that necessarily in those early days. You go previously, you had the Browns, you had the Packers, you had the same 2 or 3 teams that were continuously slugging it out for a championship. But That number was at that point in time was changing and helped change the dynamics of the NFL.
Absolutely agree with you. Now we get to our ultimate GOAT here of who we think is the greatest Cowboys player of all time. We start with our guest, Craig. You get to choose. Who do you think is the greatest Cowboys player in franchise history of the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, you saved the best for last, and I'm going to go with Roger Staubach. There's a lot of great Cowboy players over the course of the year, but when you talk about Americas and you talk about setting the tone for the future of a franchise, Roger Staubach, I believe, set that future for the franchise. So the greatest of all time, you look at him from, like I said, college and what he did there, what he did for his country, and what he did for the city of Dallas and the Dallas Cowboys. There's no real question. The fact that he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, an honor that's, quite honestly, as a civilian, there isn't anything as higher. Look at him and what he did, class that he brought to the Cowboys in that position. You can't talk about the Dallas Cowboys without talking about Roger Staubach. Again, there's lots of things you can look at in between, and there's lots of good things, and people will argue the fact about what is this and what is that. But you're talking about who set the Cowboys on the direction of being the most hated team because they're America's team. It was Roger Staubach, and he's a person that you just can't hate.
For me, there's a couple guys. Obviously, Roger Staubach is Troy. I don't want to give it to him just because, again, like I will say, because of the teammates surrounding him, even though he performed great, but I don't think he was like peak leader. Like, I mean, obviously the quarterback's the biggest position you have in football, but I don't think he was like right there, like dominated his position so well. Yeah, he won the 3 Super Bowls, but I can't give it to Troy there. Emmitt Smith definitely in my finals list because you don't see running backs get that far and how consistent they are extremely. The only thing I'll knock him off for is the offensive line part. That's the only thing I give him it, but he definitely did dominate. Larry Allen did not get the Super Bowls, but he dominated so well. I mean, the 7 first-team All-Pros and the 11 Pro Bowls, like, that's very good and very hard against, like, again, Reggie White. He had his moment against Reggie White and beat him still, especially against the Packers in the 90s when the Cowboys owned the Packers in the 90s against Brett Favre. And every time the Packers would lose, they go to a different hotel every year, and they still lose to the Cowboys. Fortunately, that changed, thankfully, in my time because of that man right there and Mr. Aaron Rodgers. So thank you for that. But if I have to give it to somebody, every time I think about the Cowboys, what first player comes to my mind when I think about the Cowboys? It's Roger Staubach. Because you mentioned before, Craig, he represents America. He went to the Hall of Fame, was in the Army, Mr. Captain America and Captain Comeback. He set the standard of what it meant to be a Cowboy. Even under Tom Landry, he said what to be. Bob Lewis, I really love him, but Roger Staubach is always the guy that comes to my mind when I think about him. When I think about a Cowboys player, it's always Roger Staubach. So I have to give it to him as my ultimate great Cowboys player of all time.
Jeremy, I couldn't agree more. He's a credit to, and I'll say, the National Football League. And that's as important as anything else. But to the Cowboys, you're exactly right. He set the bar and set them up for becoming America's team. And that puts him, for me, the GOAT of the Cowboys.
Well, folks, that is all we got here for the Cowboys episode. Let us know what you think here in the chat. Are we right? Are we wrong? Who do you think should have been the GOAT? Who do you think should have been honorable mentioned that didn't get mentioned? Michael Irvin, maybe, or Tony Romo? Just let us know in the chat, folks. We appreciate it. And once again, Craig, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon.